They say war kills a man once. Grief kills him every damn morning. Cade Stone didn't talk to folks. He didn't ride into towns. But when the Apache called for medicine, he saddled up. Not because he cared, because staying still meant facing the ghost of his brother. And the only thing colder than the snow beneath his boots was the silence he lived in. Snow crusted the edge of the valley, wind-scoured and thin where pine shadows met the ground. A creek, half frozen and slow, whispered between the rocks. The sky hung low and gray, the color of spent gunmetal. Cade Stone rode that lonely trail like a man half-carved from the same stone his name carried. His breath fogged with each step his horse took, pluming in short bursts against the stillness. His coat, stiff from weeks without rest, hung heavy with trail dust and frost. His hat brim shaded eyes that hadn't softened since the war ended. 5 years of bloodshed had stripped the words out of him. The ambush that took his brother Sam had finished the rest. These days, Cade kept to himself. A shack by the creek, some rabbits in traps, a rifle that still remembered its purpose, and a silence so thick it might as well have been a second skin. But this morning, he rode, for the first time in weeks, carrying a pouch of dried roots and bitter herbs. Not charity, a trade, a reason to move, a reason not to drown in memory. Taza's camp was close, hidden among the cottonwoods where smoke curled into the sky like quiet prayer. Cade slowed his horse, not from fear, but from respect. Apache land was no place for loud boots or loud mouths. He dismounted in silence. Children paused their chores to watch him. Dogs sniffed the air. 2 warriors stood by a lodge, spears upright, eyes sharp. Cade offered a nod and dropped the medicine pouch at the feet of an elder whose face looked like it had weathered every season twice over. That was all he meant to do. Drop the medicine. Ride out. Let the trail erase his tracks before dark. But the cry changed everything. A shout tore through the stillness like a blade. Cade froze. That sound. It wasn't panic. It was the sound men made when death came fast. He moved before thought could stop him. Boots cracking against frost, he pushed into the nearest lodge where heat and smoke hung heavy. Taza lay curled on a bed of furs, his hand slick with blood pressed against his ribs. His breathing was shallow. Fever had already begun to cloud his eyes. "Raiders," a young warrior spat, voice clipped. "Came in the dark. Our healer's gone." Cade said nothing. He didn't need to. The battlefield had trained his hands better than any surgeon. He rolled up his sleeves and barked low. "Boil water. Bring cloth." No one questioned him. He worked through the blood, packing herbs tight, bandaging the wound with pressure that hurt but held. The fire popped. Wind howled outside. But Cade barely heard it. All he could hear was Sam's ragged breathing, dying in his arms all over again. He fought that memory like he fought the fever in the chief's body, hard, relentless, unforgiving. Night fell. Still, Cade didn't leave. His shoulders ached, his hands were raw, but he sat, watching every rise and fall of Taza's chest. And then, at first light, the chief stepped out of the lodge. Slow, but alive. The camp gathered like a wave. Cade stood, removed his hat. Taza met his eyes, his voice low but steady. "You saved my life. For this, you choose one daughter. In honor." Cade froze. 4 women stood by the fire. 3 looked ready, heads bowed in duty. But one stood back. Dirty, torn dress, shoulder exposed where a hand had ripped the seam. Her eyes, defiant, unbroken, not offered. She wasn't part of the choice. She was a survivor, a scar that hadn't faded. Cade's stomach turned. His voice, when it came, was sharp as iron. "I take no one." Taza nodded once. Understanding passed like a stone between them. Cade turned to leave, but soft footsteps followed. She was there. Blanket tight, breath shallow, chin lifted, not begging, not asking, choosing. And Cade, for reasons he didn't yet understand, lifted his hand. She took it. They rode back in silence, one man haunted by memory, one woman stripped of safety, both carrying more than they said. If that hit something in your chest, there's more to come. Subscribe now and ride with us down the full trail. You won't want to miss what's waiting ahead. Cade didn't flinch when the cry rang out across the camp. It was the kind of sound that made the back of a man's neck stiffen, urgent, panicked, low and sharp like something torn from the gut. He'd heard it before, too many times, and every time it meant the same thing. Somebody was dying, and dying fast. He didn't look at the girl still holding on to the saddle blanket. He didn't need to. Her fingers had already slipped free of his. She stayed behind as he moved, boots crunching over frost and pine needles, following the men sprinting toward a large lodge near the center of the camp. Inside, the air hit thick, wet heat, smoke curling under stretched hides, and the heavy copper scent of blood. Chief Taza lay on his side in a bed of furs, his chest rising in stutters, one hand clamped tight over his ribs. The blood wasn't fresh anymore. It had darkened, dried, soaked into the buckskin that clung to his frame. Fever had already sunk its claws into him, eyes glazed, jaw locked. "He took a shot," one young warrior said in broken English, crouched beside the chief. "Raiders, last night. Thought he was just bruised. But—" His voice trailed off as Cade knelt. The boy backed up without needing to be told. Cade didn't say much. He never did. He just peeled back the blood-caked shirt, saw the raw hole just below the ribs. Nasty angle, deep and dirty. Could have been a .44 slug, or some rusty scatter shot, but the real threat now was the infection taking hold. He rolled up his sleeves and spoke low but firm. "Get water boiling. Clean cloth. Strip bark from the medicine bundle and mash it wet." Nobody argued. They moved. He worked fast but steady, pulling every ounce of battlefield muscle memory into his hands. Sam's face flickered behind his eyes, Sam coughing blood under a hickory tree, his voice saying, "Don't leave me." Cade had left anyway, to flank, to fight, to live. But this time, he stayed. He poured boiling water over the wound, packed it with bitter herbs and pine sap. He stitched where he could and pressed cloth down hard to stop the bleed that still seeped slow and steady. Taza didn't cry out, just gritted his teeth and let out one long breath through his nose. Outside, the camp went quiet. A hush fell as word spread that the chief was down. Cade didn't care about respect or titles. All he saw was a man clinging to life and a choice to be made: stand up and fight for him, or walk out and hear that cry echo in his chest for the rest of his life. So he fought. He stayed through the worst of it. The shakes, the cold sweat, the moment the breathing turned shallow as a creek in drought. He sat by the fire through dusk and past midnight, changing soaked cloth, grinding roots with the butt of his knife, whispering instructions in a voice he barely used anymore. He didn't pray, not aloud, but his hands never stopped. By the time the firewood crackled down to red coals and the night grew quiet again, Cade was still sitting. A woman came in and left broth beside him. Another added logs to the fire. They didn't speak. They just watched the man who didn't belong here give more than some kinfolk ever did. And then the chief stirred. Just a twitch of the fingers at first. Then a groan. Then his lips moved, dry and cracked. Cade leaned in, pressed water to them, and waited. Taza's eyes fluttered open just before dawn. He was still weak, pale, but alive. Cade leaned back, running a hand over his face, feeling the crust of dried sweat and fatigue clinging to his skin like dust after a cattle drive. He exhaled slow. Behind him, a few warriors let out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. One of them murmured something soft in Apache. A blessing, maybe, or a warning. Cade didn't need to know the words. He knew what it meant to drag someone back from the edge. He didn't smile. He didn't thank himself. He just stepped outside into the cold, rubbing the ache from his shoulders, and let the firelight flicker behind him. But in his chest, that ghost stirred again. Because no matter how many men he saved, Sam still lay in that ditch, blood on Cade's hands. He'd done what he couldn't do back then. He'd stayed. But some ghosts didn't care about redemption. The fire crackled low, its light throwing long shadows across the inside of the lodge. Cade Stone sat cross-legged near the chief's side, his back aching, fingers sore, but his eyes sharp. He hadn't slept, didn't plan to. Taza's breathing had steadied, but fever still clung to him like a second skin. Every now and then, the old man would shift beneath the blankets, murmuring in Apache, words Cade couldn't understand but recognized all the same. Fragments of pain, memory, and ghosts. They sounded too much like his own. Outside, the camp had gone quiet, blanketed in frost and fatigue. Warriors took turns stoking the fires. Somewhere near the edge of the cottonwoods, someone was singing low, something ancient and mournful. Inside the lodge, Cade kept vigil. He didn't trust the fever not to take a second swing. He was running on grit and nothing else. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His eyes stung from smoke, and the ache in his shoulders from holding pressure against the wound had gone from a burn to a numb, pounding throb. But he stayed. Because the truth was, sitting in that fire-lit room, listening to the wheezing breath of a man who shouldn't have made it, felt more right than anything Cade had done in a long time. It wasn't redemption, but it was damn close. Just before dawn, Taza stirred again, this time with more weight behind it. His hand flexed against the furs, eyes blinking as though pulling through fog. Cade leaned forward and held a tin cup to the man's lips. Taza drank, slow but steady, and then let out a dry breath that sounded halfway to a laugh. "You've got the hands of a healer," he said in a gravel voice, but the eyes of a man who never forgives himself. Cade didn't answer. He just sat back on his heels and watched the old man study him. "You stayed," Taza murmured. "That matters." He reached toward a carved walking stick resting near the wall, pulled himself to sitting. It wasn't easy, but he did it without help. Outside, voices stirred. Someone had seen the flap open. A few warriors gathered near the lodge. Women looked up from their work. Even the dogs went still. And then Taza stepped out into the cold morning, leaning heavy on the stick, but upright. A hush fell across the camp like a curtain. Cade followed him out, blinking against the pale light of dawn. Smoke curled lazy from the fires. Snow glittered on the tall grass. Taza turned to face the gathering. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "This man," he said, voice worn but sure, "did what others would not. He held back death. For that, he has earned something sacred." He nodded toward the fire pit, where 4 young women stood in a line, shoulders straight, hands folded. "He may choose one of my daughters," Taza said. "That is my word." Cade stiffened like he'd been struck. He wasn't used to being seen, let alone offered something in front of a crowd. His stomach twisted. Not with fear. He'd long made peace with danger. but with something colder. Shame, discomfort, a creeping sense of being mistaken for someone else. The three women in front met his eyes briefly, respectful, composed. Then his gaze drifted, almost by accident, to the girl behind them. She wasn't standing in line. She was standing apart, wrapped in a worn blanket, dirt on her cheek, a tear in her buckskin dress at the shoulder where a hand had clearly ripped it. Her chin was lifted, but her eyes flickered with something wounded and raw. Not submission. Not invitation. Survival. She didn't look at him long. Just enough to say, "I'm still here, but not yours to take." And that was when Cade felt the heat rise in his chest. He turned to Taza, his jaw set. "I take no one," he said, his voice low, steady. "That's not what I came for." The camp was silent. Taza looked at him a long moment, then gave a single nod, slow, deliberate. Cade turned, the cold wind biting through his shirt, and made for his horse. He didn't hear her footsteps until he reached the saddle. Soft, cautious, not fearful. She stopped beside him. Breath visible, hands trembling, but not from cold, from choosing. She didn't speak, just looked at him, and Cade, for reasons he couldn't name, lifted his hand. Slowly, so she could refuse. She didn't. Her hand met his, small and cold in his palm. He helped her up behind the saddle, careful not to touch more than he had to. They rode out in silence, just the sound of hooves in frost, and a new, terrible weight in his chest. The weight of being trusted again. The ride out of the Apache camp was quiet. Not just between Cade and the girl, but in the air itself. The kind of silence that comes after something breaks, and the pieces haven't stopped moving yet. Tala sat behind him, her fingers gripping the back of his coat, not for closeness, but for balance. Her blanket was pulled tight, her breath steady but shallow. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't ask why she'd followed. Cade kept his eyes on the ridgeline ahead, letting the horse pick its path through the thin crust of snow. Every so often he'd glance back, just enough to be sure she was still there. She always was. The cabin came into view late in the day, tucked against a stand of bare cottonwoods. Smoke drifted from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before leaving, and was thankful it had held. The corral fence sagged where a storm had warped it, and the roof needed new pitch come spring. But it stood, and it was his. It wasn't much, but it was safer than what she'd left behind. He dismounted and offered her a hand down. She took it, careful and quick, avoiding his eyes as her bare feet hit the snow-dusted porch. He stepped inside first, brushing snow from his shoulders, and held the door for her. One bed, one chair, a stove, a table, and hooks hung with old tools. She paused in the doorway. Not from fear, but something more guarded. Her eyes scanned every corner like she was memorizing the exits. "You can have the bed," he said, voice low, boots still muddy. "I'll sleep by the stove." She nodded once and stepped inside, curling onto the edge of the cot with the blanket still wrapped around her. The fire snapped in the stove, casting thin light across her face. Cade set water to boil and busied his hands with the kind of small work that keeps a man's thoughts at bay. He didn't ask questions. He'd known too many men who came back from war with wounds they wouldn't name. He figured her silence was the same kind. When the fire settled and the shadows rose, she finally lay back, still wrapped in the blanket, still facing the door. And sometime after midnight, she started to shake. It wasn't loud, just a tremor in her shoulders, a twitch of her hands beneath the furs. Cade sat up slow and moved closer. Not touching, just enough to be near. Her breathing was ragged, like someone running in place. Then she whispered something in Apache, too soft for him to catch. He didn't say a word, just rested a hand close to hers, palm down, steady as earth. After a while, her breathing eased, and Cade realized something strange. He wasn't thinking about Sam. Morning came sharp and silver, frost thick on the windows. Cade was already moving, chopping wood, fetching water, tending to snares, when he noticed the door crack open. Tala stepped out wrapped in her blanket, boots borrowed from his gear pile. Her eyes were squinted against the cold, but her posture was straighter. Not healed, not safe, but choosing to stand. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the river bend. She followed. They didn't walk close. She kept a half step behind, still watching, still weighing. But she wasn't hiding. That mattered. At the far trapline, she stopped and asked, quiet but clear, "You live alone?" Cade shrugged. "Easier that way." She nodded once, like she understood something about that. After a pause, she said, "I ran when raiders came." Cade kept his eyes on the snare. Would have been foolish not to. "I didn't fight, didn't stay, I just ran." He glanced at her now. The bruise on her arm was darker this morning, high on the bicep where a hand had grabbed too tight. Her dress hung loose where it had torn, but her chin stayed lifted. "You survived," he said. "That's enough." She looked away. "Some say I should have stayed, protected others." He leaned on his knee, voice flat but certain. "Survival ain't a sin." She met his gaze, held it longer this time. He could see it in her eyes. That gnawing, silent guilt. The same thing he saw in the mirror each morning. Back at the cabin, he handed her a needle and strong thread. Set her up at the table while he chopped wood outside. When he came back in, she'd already mended one shoulder of her dress. Her hands moved slow but steady, stitching with quiet purpose. The blanket had slipped down her back, skin exposed again. But this time she didn't flinch, didn't hide. And Cade didn't stare. He just said, "Door opens both ways. You leave when you want. No one holds you here." She paused, then said, "I stay, for now." He nodded. "Then we make it work." Outside, the wind picked up, bending the trees. A storm might have been coming. But inside, the cabin had grown warmer. Not because of the fire, because neither of them ran. Cade didn't hear her coming. The snow muffled her steps, soft as ash drifting from a dying fire. He was already at the edge of camp, one boot in the stirrup, ready to leave it all behind. The smoke, the offer, the weight of people looking at him like he was something noble. He wasn't. Then he felt her behind him. Not a word. Just her breath, catching in the cold air. He turned. She stood there wrapped in that same worn blanket, the hem soaked with slush. Her bare feet sunk into the crusted snow, shoulders drawn, but her chin lifted like it had been all morning. The defiance was still there, just quieter now. No ceremony, no asking. She'd followed him because she chose to. Cade said nothing. He didn't reach. He just raised his hand, slow and open, fingers loose. She looked at it for a second like she wasn't sure it was real. Then, without speaking, she placed her hand in his. Cold, shaking, but steady. He helped her onto the back of his horse, careful not to touch more than he needed. She settled behind him, arms around his waist. Not tightly, just enough to keep from falling. They left the Apache camp behind in silence, the pine trees rising around them like sentinels. The ride back took most of the day. The wind picked up by noon, cutting across the flats like a blade. Cade pulled his coat tighter. The girl didn't complain. She didn't speak at all. She just held on. When they reached the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the ridge, casting long shadows through the cottonwoods. Smoke still drifted from the chimney. Barely. Cade was glad he'd banked the fire right. He dismounted first and held the reins while she slid down behind him. Again, she avoided his eyes. He didn't press. She looked tired, worn to the bone. Not broken, but damn close. He opened the cabin door and stepped aside to let her pass. It was a simple place. 4 walls, a stove, 1 bed, 1 chair, 1 table. Tools hung neat on pegs. The smell of cold coffee, pine resin, and iron lingered in the air. She stopped just inside, blanket drawn close, eyes darting from corner to corner. Measuring. Weighing. Cade pulled the door shut behind them and unbuckled his gear. He didn't speak until he'd stoked the fire and hung up his coat. "You take the bed," he said, voice low. "I'll stay by the stove." She nodded once, no fuss, no argument, just moved to the cot and sat down slowly, like she was still unsure her legs would hold. The fire began to catch again, flames licking up with a dry crackle. Cade poured water into the kettle and hung it over the flame. He moved with the kind of quiet rhythm a man falls into when there's nothing left to prove. She pulled the blanket tighter. Her dress had slipped at the collar, showing the bruised skin of her shoulder. Cade saw it, but looked away. No staring, no words, just respect. That was all he had to offer. Night came hard. Wind scratched at the shutters like claws on wood. The girl, Tala, he'd heard someone whisper her name back at camp, curled up on the cot, back to the room, arms tucked under the blanket. She didn't sleep easy. She twitched once, then again, a low whimper catching in her throat like she was being hunted in her dreams. Cade stirred the fire and sat on the floor nearby, arms on his knees, just watching. When her breath caught again, sharp like panic, he reached out slow, careful not to spook her. His fingers hovered near her arm, then rested gently on her forearm, barely a touch. She flinched, then stilled. The trembling stopped after that. Her breathing slowed. The cabin quieted. He didn't move for a long while. By dawn, the air had gone still. Frost covered the windows, pale as ash. Cade rose stiff from the floor. The fire had gone to embers, but warmth still hung in the air. The girl was still asleep. Tighter now, steadier. Her hands no longer clenched. He watched her for a moment, then moved to the stove and set water to heat. When she stirred, she sat up slow, blinking like she wasn't sure where she was. "You're safe," Cade said simply. No poetry, just truth. She nodded. Her voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. "Thank you." Cade didn't answer, just poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear this time, from relief. The cabin was quiet. Not the empty kind. Cade had known that brand of silence for years. This was different. This was shared silence. Tala hadn't left. 3 mornings had come and gone since he brought her back, and each time the sun broke over the ridge, she was still there, wrapped in his spare coat, seated by the stove, braiding her long black hair with hands that remembered who she was, even if her voice hadn't said much yet. She didn't ask for anything, didn't offer much either. But she helped where she could. Cleaned the tin cups, gathered wood, folded the furs after sleep like it meant something to keep them neat. Cade watched her from the corner of his eye, the way a man might watch a fire in dry country, close enough for warmth, wary enough to know it could still burn him. She didn't flinch when he moved past her anymore. That was something. He didn't push conversation. They shared coffee in the mornings, shared soup when he had it, shared space when neither knew what to say. That was more than Cade had shared with anyone since the war. On the fourth morning, he noticed the bruise on her arm was fading. But something else showed clearer in its place. A small, jagged scar near the elbow. Half circle, like a bite or a burn, long healed but never mentioned. The kind of mark a person collects when they've had to survive by more than just luck. She caught him looking. He didn't apologize. He just nodded at it and said, "Old?" She nodded. "Years." That was it. Just 2 words passed between them. But they stuck. Later that day, he took her down to check the trap line by the river. The snow had crusted over, and the wind carried the bite of something that might turn to storm. He offered her a scarf. She took it without fuss. They moved quiet along the trail, him in front, her close behind. Not beside him yet, but close. At the far bend, he crouched near a snare half buried in drifted snow. Empty. He reset it slow, fingers moving with practiced ease. Tala watched. "You trap often?" she asked, voice soft but not unsure. "When I need to," he replied. "Mostly to stay busy." She crouched beside him then, boots crunching snow. "That's how I feel about sewing." He glanced at her. She met his eyes. "I don't care much about dresses," she added, "but stitching keeps my hands from remembering too much." Cade looked back at the wire, twisting it into place. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "I know that feeling." That night, they sat at the table in low firelight. Cade sharpened his knife with a whetstone, the rasping sound the only thing filling the space between them. Tala held a shirt of his, ripped at the shoulder, and began to sew. Her fingers were quick, steady. She didn't ask if it needed fixing. When she tied off the last stitch, she folded it neat and set it down in front of him. He didn't look up, just said, "Thank you." She nodded. Her voice came after a long beat. "My sister's name is Nita," she said. "Younger than me. She was in the camp when the raiders came. I don't know if she made it." Cade set down the whetstone and looked at her. Really looked this time. "I'm sorry." "She was smart," Tala said. "Quick. If she saw them coming, maybe." The way her voice caught on maybe told him all he needed. He wanted to say something that mattered, something that didn't feel like dust in his throat. But he'd never been good at words that tried to heal, so he offered what he did know. "When spring comes and the pass is clear," he said, "we can ride back, look for her." She blinked, didn't speak right away. Then just a whisper. "You'd do that?" He nodded. "Don't make promises easy, but I don't like leaving things unfinished." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It felt like ground being laid. A foundation. That night, while the fire burned low and snow tapped gently against the shutters, Tala slept with her hand near the rifle he'd taught her to load that morning. And Cade sat by the door, wide awake, listening to the wind. He wasn't sure what he was guarding against anymore. Raiders, wolves, or memories. But she was inside. And that changed everything. The snow had softened, and with it came a stillness Cade didn't trust. He was up early that morning, cutting through crusted powder to check the south fence line. Tala stayed behind to tend the fire and boil what roots she'd dug the day before. She was starting to move through the cabin like it belonged to her hands, too. not just his mercy. That made something in Cade ease, and something else coil tight. He didn't want to name either feeling. He reached the last post just as the wind shifted. That's when he saw it. A boot print. Fresh. Too fresh to be his. Too wide to be hers. And it pointed straight toward the cabin. He didn't run. Running made noise. But he moved quick, hand on the butt of his rifle, boots barely sinking into the top layer of snow. Every branch creak, every squirrel's twitch in the trees felt like a shout in his ears. By the time the cabin came into view through the brush, his heart was pounding, not from exertion, but from something heavier. Older. He knew this feeling. War had it. So did regret. The door was shut, no smoke curling from the stovepipe. That wasn't right. Tala kept the fire going even when it didn't need tending. Said silence made her skin itch. Cade stepped to the side of the cabin, breath fogging, and peered through the small window. She was still inside. Standing. Frozen. Not from cold. From the man behind her. Cade didn't call out. Didn't wait. The door flew open on its hinges, rifle leveled. The stranger turned just enough for Cade to catch the edge of his grin. Greasy hair, slick coat, teeth like old fence nails. "Easy there," the man said, hands up but not shaken. "Didn't mean no harm, just cold. Thought I'd ask the lady for a little kindness." "You don't ask with your hand near a knife," Cade said, low and flat. Tala hadn't moved. Her arms were rigid, jaw tight, but her eyes flicked once to Cade, and that was enough. The man shrugged. "Don't see your name on the place." "You see my gun, though." A long pause. Then the stranger dropped his hand from the belt. "Guess I'll be going then," he said. "You'll go," Cade growled. "And if I see your print again, I'll dig the hole before I shoot." The man held up both hands now, mocking a peace offering. But Cade saw it, in the man's eyes. Recognition. This wasn't random. They watched him vanish down the ridge, Cade standing at the threshold long after the figure was out of sight. Inside, Tala finally exhaled. "He knew me," she whispered. Cade turned. "You sure?" "I've seen that man before," she said. "He was with the ones who came for the camp. He wasn't the leader, but he laughed when they dragged the girls." Cade's grip tightened around the rifle. "I should have killed him," he muttered. Tala stepped forward, her voice sharper now. "If you had, others would come sooner. They don't scatter when one of their own disappears. They come hunting." He looked at her. Really looked. "You speak from knowing." "I do." That night, Cade couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, oil lamp low, rifle across his lap. Every gust of wind outside became hooves in his mind. Every creak in the wood frame made his pulse twitch. Tala didn't rest much either. She'd rolled out her bedding near the hearth, but lay with eyes open, staring into the flames. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. Cade nodded. "Not alone." He took a long breath. "You should leave. Ride for the pass. Try to find your sister." Tala sat up, her face half-shadowed. "You think I scare easy?" "No," he said. "I think I ain't worth dying for." A quiet. Then, softly, "You were the only one who didn't look at me like I was something broken." Cade didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, he said, "We'll need to move supplies to the root cellar, reinforce the windows. You planning to stay? I don't run easy either." She smiled, barely. Then picked up her coat. The storm wasn't here yet. But the wind was changing. Somewhere out there, men who wore knives like smiles were licking their lips. And Cade knew one truth he hadn't admitted till now. He had something to lose again. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. 3 nights passed, and Cade didn't sleep more than an hour each. The mountains were too quiet. He'd spent every daylight hour hauling supplies to the root cellar, sacks of beans, smoked meat, ammunition. Tala helped without being asked, moving like someone who'd done this before. She didn't question his orders, didn't flinch when he handed her a shotgun and showed her how to brace it. "You ever fired one?" he asked. She looked him dead in the eye. "Not by choice, but yes." That was all she said. By the 4th morning, frost had crept in through the window frames. Cade patched them with old feed sacks and chewed burlap, but it wasn't cold that made the hair on his neck stand up. It was the wind. Dead still. Not a branch creaked. Not a crow stirred. The woods were holding their breath. Then the first sound came, not loud, not fast, just a hoofbeat, followed by another. Then 3. He grabbed the rifle, met Tala's eyes. She already had her coat on, her braid tied back tight. No fear in her face, just clarity. Cade moved to the edge of the window and peeked through the warped pane. 4 riders, coming slow, like they knew they weren't in a hurry. One wore a red scarf. Another had a saddle with braided fringe. The third had a Henry rifle resting crosswise like it was made for show. And the 4th, riding slightly behind, was the one Cade recognized. The man from the cabin. Greasy smile, same damned coat. He was back, and this time he wasn't alone. "They're scoping," Cade muttered. "They don't want to fight till they know what they're walking into." Tala stood beside him now. "Then don't let 'em know." Cade blinked at her. "You want to bluff?" She nodded. "I've seen cattle scatter from shadows. Let's give them one." Together they made a show. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, coat flared open to show the holstered Colt on his hip. Tala stayed back, framed in the doorway, holding the shotgun. Not low, not hidden. The riders slowed, stopped just beyond the clearing. The one in the red scarf tipped his hat. "Mornin', neighbor." Cade didn't return the pleasantry. "You're not from round here." "Nope, but your cabin's mighty cozy. Thought we'd stop by, maybe trade. I don't trade with scavengers." That made the greasy one grin wider. "Ain't you the polite type?" Cade locked eyes with him. "You're one boot print away from being a ghost." The tension held. The riders didn't draw, but they didn't retreat either. Then Red Scarf laughed. "We'll be on our way then. Didn't mean to rile you." They turned their horses, one by one. Slow, unhurried. But Cade didn't drop the rifle till they disappeared past the tree line. Inside, Tala set the shotgun down gently. "They'll come back." "I know." "Tonight?" He didn't answer right away, just started loading shells into his rifle. "Yes." They set up defenses. Cade nailed boards across lower windows, pushed the stove to reinforce the front door, loaded extra shells into his coat, gave Tala a second knife to wear at her side. "You sure you want to stay for this?" he asked. "I didn't run when they came before," she said. "Not startin' now." Something in Cade's chest twisted. Pride? Regret? He couldn't tell. Maybe both. The sun died fast that night. By moonrise, Cade had posted himself near the door, rifle ready. Tala crouched behind the overturned table, breath calm, muscles tight. Then, a twig snapped. He raised the rifle. Footsteps padded over snow, and then, glass shattered. A Molotov smashed against the side wall, flames licking fast at the curtain. Tala moved first, grabbing the water pail, doused it before the fire spread. Then the door rattled. Once. Twice. Bang. Cade fired through it. A cry rang out. Then came chaos. Gunfire from outside. A second flaming bottle hurled, missed, shattered against a rock. Cade ducked, returned fire through the window. One figure dropped, but the others charged. And just as Cade braced for the door to bust open, a shot rang out from behind the cabin. Not his, not theirs. A clean, sharp crack. Another. Then the riders' curses cut through the night. "Hawk's got us pinned." "Pull back! Pull back!" hooves thundered. Fading. Silence returned. Except for the sound of one rider, wounded, dragging himself through the snow. Cade opened the door, rifle aimed, but the man was gone. Only blood. And a fresh trail headed into the trees. Tala stepped up behind him. "Who shot from behind?" Cade stared into the woods. "I don't know." But he had a feeling this wasn't over. No, it was just beginning. Dawn came slow and red, bleeding through smoke-stained skies. Cade stood outside the cabin, boots rooted in blood-flecked snow. The bodies were gone, dragged off into the woods sometime after the shooting stopped. But the ground still remembered. Burn marks blackened the logs where a fire bottle had kissed the wall. The porch railing was half splintered from a boot that never made it inside. Tala stepped beside him, wrapped in a coat too big, but eyes sharp as a blade. She looked to the trees, then to the hillside. "You saw the flash too, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded. "Third Ridge, east side. That shot saved our skins. Or warned him off to keep the prize for himself." She didn't reply, just kept her hand close to the knife at her waist. By noon, the wind changed. Cade was stringing fresh wire across the south fence when he saw movement near the tree line. Just one man. No horse. Limping. He didn't raise his gun. Not yet. The figure came slow, half collapsing every few steps, one hand clutching his side. Blood soaked his jacket. The other arm was wrapped in a torn cavalry sleeve, faded blue, buttons missing. Cade leveled the rifle. Not another step. The man stopped, looked up. Not young, not old. Apache blood, no doubt. Dark skin, high cheekbones, eyes hard as river stone. But he wore boots from a dead soldier, and his breath came in rattles. "I ain't here to rob," he said hoarsely. "I shot the bastard who tossed that fire." "That makes you a damn good shot," Cade muttered. The man swayed. And a worse bleeder. He crumpled. Tala helped Cade drag him inside. They stripped the coat, cut away the bloodied shirt. The wound was clean. Upper ribs, right side. Bullet went straight through. No fragments. No infection yet. Cade boiled water. Tala cleaned the hole with steady hands. The man barely flinched. "What's your name?" Cade asked as he tied off the bandage. "Name's Sani," he whispered. "Used to run with a scout party out of Fort Mesilla, till they figured I wasn't white enough for medals or rations. You were Army?" "Scout. Apache. Disposable." Cade leaned back, frowning. "And you just happened to be nearby when 4 bastards rode in to torch my place?" Sani coughed. "Didn't happen. Been following them 2 days. They took something that wasn't theirs." His eyes slid to Tala. She stiffened. "What did they take?" "My sister." The silence that followed could have split logs. Tala stepped back. Her fingers trembled, just once, then stopped. "You're her brother?" "I was," Sani rasped. "If she's still breathing." "I am," Tala said, voice tight. Cade blinked. "You two know each other?" "We were children together," she said. "Before the soldiers came." Sani looked at her like he was trying to recognize the girl from another life. "You ran. I stayed." And for that, they punished us both. The room grew heavy with memories. Cade looked between them. 2 ghosts wearing flesh. 2 branches from the same burned tree. You shot one, Cade finally said. How many left? 3 I saw. Could be more. They ain't done. That fire was just the knock. You figure they'll be back? Sani gave a thin smile. They're cowards, not fools. But men like that, when they lose one of their own, they don't let it go. Cade stared at the rifle leaning by the wall. Then neither do we. That night, the 3 of them sat around the table. No whiskey, no fire. Just quiet chewing and broken thoughts. Sani spoke first. They took her 3 winters ago. I've been tracking ever since. Thought she was gone. When I saw the smoke up here, I figured, one more body. Tala looked down. They sold me, passed me through 3 camps. I escaped during the snowstorm, found Cade's fence and never looked back. Sani's voice cracked. I thought I failed you. She reached across the table, touched his bandaged hand. No, she whispered. You found me. Later, Cade stood out under the stars. The ridge glowed pale under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, those men were regrouping, reloading. But now Cade wasn't alone. He had a reason to stay, and a reason to fight. The sun rose mean and slow, dragging shadows over the frozen earth like old debts. Cade had been up before first light, checking traps, counting shells. His hands moved like a man who'd built fences his whole life, but his eyes kept drifting toward the ridge, toward the place where men who didn't belong here would surely ride again. Inside the cabin, Sani rested on the cot, breathing shallow but steady. Tala sat near the fire, sharpening her blade with a stone that sang low and quiet. There was no small talk, no good mornings, just the kind of hush that knows what's coming. Cade stepped in and set the last 3 bullets on the table. That's all we got. After that, it's knives or fists. Sani nodded. I got 1 arm and a grudge. That's worth something. Tala looked up. We ain't dying today. No one argued, but no one said they believed it either. By mid-morning, the snow had turned to slush underfoot. Cade set traps along the back trail and pulled the horses close to the barn, reins tied tight. Then he waited. The first sign was the hawk, circling low, agitated. Then a snort, distant but close enough to cut the silence. They came slow, like hyenas sniffing the edge of firelight. 4 riders, guns loose in their hands, eyes scanning like they already owned the place. The one in front, Dutch, wore a long brown coat and a crooked smile that looked carved with a knife. He stopped 10 feet from Cade's line of sight and tipped his hat. Thought we might come for what's ours, Dutch said. Cade didn't answer. Where's the girl? Dutch called. Still no answer. Dutch chuckled. That ain't very neighborly, Cowboy. You know she don't belong to you. Cade's voice cut sharp. Then she don't belong to any man. The first shot cracked like dry wood, splitting in the cold. Sani, from the cabin window, straight through the shoulder of the one on the right. Tala was already moving, out the side door, circling the back of the barn like wind through a canyon. Cade rolled behind the water trough as Dutch's men fired back, bullets tearing splinters and kicking up mud. It wasn't a battle, it was a storm. 3 minutes of chaos, 1 scream, 1 horse down, blood on Cade's sleeve. Then silence. When the dust settled, Dutch was on 1 knee, bleeding from his thigh, staring down the barrel of Tala's knife. You don't have to do this, he hissed. I was just following orders, selling what folks would pay for. Tala's hand trembled once, then stilled. You sold children, she whispered. He opened his mouth, maybe to lie, maybe to beg. He never got the chance. When it was over, Sani leaned against the cabin wall, bandage soaked again. Cade tossed a shovel to the ground. "We bury him, same as any man?" Tala nodded, wiping her blade clean in the snow. They worked in silence, no crosses, just stones, just enough to mark the earth and move on. That evening, the fire crackled low. No one said much. The fear was gone, but it had left a kind of hollowness in its place. Sani looked to his sister. "You could come south. There's land down near Mesilla, Apache land. We could build again." Tala stared into the fire. "We already are." She glanced at Cade. The look wasn't soft, it wasn't romantic. It was earned. "I'll stay," she said simply. Cade didn't smile, but his shoulders eased like a man finally dropping the weight of guilt he'd carried too long. Later that night, he walked out to the fence. The stars were clearer now, like someone had scrubbed the sky clean. Behind him, the cabin stood solid, smoke curling from the chimney. A place that had nearly burned now warmed 3 souls instead. He didn't know what tomorrow held. Didn't care. He just knew this. Whatever this was, it was theirs. And maybe that was enough. The end. But let me ask you, out here where mercy costs more than bullets, what would you have done?